For a man whose code demands he never gets caught, there are a surprising amount of people who have been suspicious of Dexter. He fooled most people, and that's what counts, but what about all the people who were onto him? Today we are breaking down every person who actually suspected Dexter, beginning with the man who started it all. Harry Morgan. Who would Dexter have become if he'd been given therapy instead of the code? He could have ended up like Benet or Daniel Vogel, still jaded, malicious, and dangerous. He may have ended up like Blessing or even his own son Harrison, deeply traumatized but determined to live a healthy and normal life. But we will never know, because after his mother was slaughtered in front of him, Dexter was adopted by Harry Morgan as opposed to a normal person. Womp Harry was the first person to recognize the darkness inside of Dexter and eventually suspect him to be a killer. And what he did with that knowledge molded Dexter into the man he is today. When Dexter was rescued from that shipping container, he wasn't alone. His older brother Brian was too. Harry tried to take them both in, but Brian was disturbed and so violent that he tried to smother baby Deb shortly after he was taken in by the Morgans. They knew they couldn't manage him, so they sent him off to be rehomed. Dexter seemed normal though, especially compared to Brian, so he became part of their family. But as Dexter got older, his darkness made itself known. He behaved oddly for a kid his age, and even worse, he started showing violent tendencies of his own. Dexter started off killing small animals and neighborhood pets and burying them in the yard. Eventually, Harry found the spot where Dexter had been hiding all of the animals' bodies and confronted him about it. After that, he wouldn't even let the family own a pet. Harry knew his son was a killer, and Dexter wasn't even out of elementary school yet. But Harry noticed other things about Dexter that tipped him off as well. Dexter was emotionally detached from everyone around him, even his own family to a degree. Not only that, but Dexter seemed to lack empathy for most people. And he didn't react the way normal people do, laughing when something is funny or flirting with girls who liked him. But he was fine showing anger, and he was fascinated with death. Something Harry realized after he brought Dexter with him to a crime scene one day to show him how scary death really was. Dexter wasn't scared when he saw the corpse at all. He was entranced. He couldn't look away. After all of that, Harry was so scared of what Dexter might become that he started seeing Dr. Vogel and told her everything, desperate to get help for his son before he killed someone. She diagnosed Dexter as a psychopath and helped Harry start formulating the code to help him keep his son out of prison and off death row. Even with the code, Harry was disgusted by what Dexter was and what he had helped him become. When he witnessed Dexter in action and saw the consequence of his suspicions being correct, Harry couldn't live with himself. He overdosed on his heart medication and killed himself. Who knows if Harry was right about Dexter all along, or if he could have actually lived as something other than a killer. Either way, he was sending off warning signals left and right, and Harry picked up on all of it. And given what Dexter was suppressing from the shipping yard, it's easy to see why Harry was convinced that Dexter was going to be a killer. But one thing is for sure, it's because of what Harry suspected about Dexter and what he taught him, that led to Dexter being suspected by every other person on this list. Sergeant James Dokes, as well as Harry, tried to teach Dexter to fit in. He still had weak spots. Dexter still had a problem showing emotions appropriately. Most people didn't seem to mind, they just figured he was a little awkward at times. But Sergeant James Dokes saw exactly what Harry did, a red flag. So he thought it was odd how non-emotive Dexter was. Even when Angel was almost killed during the ice truck killer investigation, Dexter couldn't muster the same level of excitement and relief everyone else did when he was out of the woods. Dokes called Dexter out to his face about that. He always thought Dexter was a creep, and the lack of emotion was a big reason why. There was also the way that Dexter worked his crime scenes. He was almost giddy sometimes when he analyzed them, like he was having a great time. Sometimes he appeared to be in awe. To everyone else, he just looked like he was really locked in. He seemed like a dedicated forensic analyst who was determined to do his part and do it well. But Dokes saw something deeper. He didn't like how excited Dexter got at the sight of blood. It was just another sign that something was deeply wrong with Dexter. Dokes just didn't know what it was yet. When you think about people who suspected Dexter, James Dokes is definitely the first name that comes to mind. Dokes never trusted or liked Dexter, and he didn't keep that a secret. He was always antagonizing and insulting him. He would question and accuse Dexter, even in front of their other coworkers. Even when Dexter tried to be nice to Dokes, Dokes was hostile. He knew it was all an act. And his suspicions only grew as the ice truck killer investigation picked up. After Deb was kidnapped by Brian Moser, Dexter went to the shipping yard to look for her, following the clues he had been getting from the killer himself. Dokes followed Dexter there, looking for Deb in a cargo box, only heightening his suspicion that Dexter was hiding something. By the time the investigation was closed, Dokes was more suspicious of Dexter than ever. The hammer finally fell when the search for the Bay Harbor butcher kicked off. By that point, Dokes began following Dexter. He looked into Dexter's past and found out every little detail about his life, down to the night he had pizza night with Rita and the kids. Dokes found out Dexter was pretending to be an NA, and that he was listening to decades-old tapes with recordings between Harry Morgan and Laura Moser. Everything Dexter did set off alarm bells in Dokes' head. Of course, all of Dokes' suspicions were confirmed when he broke into Dexter's apartment and found his blood slides. After that, he tracked Dexter's boat and caught him in the act of disposing of Santos Jimenez's body. The rest was history. Dexter locked Dokes in a cabin, began a frame job to make him go down as the butcher, and then Lila blew him to pieces. If Harry was the first, Dokes became the second person whose suspicions of Dexter ended in death. And as we now know, he wouldn't be the last. Almost right after Dokes was finally out of his life, Dexter got wrapped up in Miguel Prado's. He mistakenly killed Oscar Prado, Miguel's little brother, but he didn't have time to clean it up. That left the little brother of the ADA dead on the floor in the house of a drug dealer. That dealer was named Freebo, and everyone just assumed he killed Oscar because right after the ambush, he fell off the grid. On top of that, he was already a suspected killer who got off on a technicality when he went on trial. Freebo was actually Dexter's intended target, and if everyone thought he killed Oscar, Dexter needed to keep it that way. That meant finding Freebo before the police did and finishing what he started. That way, Freebo could never clear his name or identify Dexter. At the same time that Dexter was hunting Freebo, Miguel Prado was also trying to find him. He was distraught after his little brother was murdered, and he wanted the killer to face justice. That meant Freebo had to go. Eventually, Dexter found Freebo and got him on his table. He stabbed Freebo in the neck just as Miguel arrived on the scene, drunk and armed, ready to kill Freebo himself. But when he saw Dexter's blood-soaked hands, Dexter had no choice but to admit to killing Freebo and claim self-defense, and Miguel seemed to buy it. Despite being Miami's ADA, it's meaning it was basically his job to bring Dexter to justice for committing murder, Miguel hugged and thanked Dexter for killing Freebo, believing that Oscar was finally avenged. After that, he wanted to be closer to Dexter. Miguel insisted on them becoming friends, and the closer he got to Dexter, the more he suspected that he was hiding something. Slowly but surely, Miguel began to figure out that Freebo wasn't Dexter's first kill, not by a long shot. But how did he know? First, Dexter was very closed off and untrusting. No one seemed to be able to crack his hard exterior, and Miguel couldn't see why someone with nothing to hide would be so guarded. Not only that, but he made Freebo completely disappear. There was no investigation or even any evidence that Freebo was dead in the first place. He was just gone. Even with all of Miami Metro's resources being poured into finding Freebo, no one could get another lead on his fate or whereabouts after Dexter took him out. That seems like a pretty impressive feat for someone who had never killed anyone before. And then, Miguel decided to put his theory to the test. It's a plot point many people forget, but Miguel actually did something Maria LaGuarta would later try and fail to pull off. He lured Dexter to a kill and then called him on it. After a frustrating day at the office, Miguel called Dexter to complain about Ethan Turner, an unchecked wife killer who was about to get away with it again. He told Dexter exactly what he had done and how angry he was that he was about to evade justice for the second time. After that, Dexter did the rest. Not realizing that Miguel was playing him, Dexter went through his normal vetting process, verifying Ethan's guilt and then setting up the perfect opportunity to kill him. Miguel even runs into Dexter right before he is about to sail off to Bimini to catch Ethan, and acts as if he is going to go with him, before saying he shouldn't because he had a lot of work to get done back at the office. Soon, Dexter's plan was in motion. He caught up with Ethan on a cruise, quickly killed him, and threw his body overboard. He was reported missing by the Coast Guard a few hours later. Miguel cornered Dexter after that. He let Dexter know that he knew he wasn't fishing, he knew Ethan was missing, and he knew that Dexter killed him. Even as Dexter tried to deny it and stick to his story, Miguel let him know that he knew better and thought Ethan's death was true justice. Next thing you know, Dexter and Miguel were planning kills together, and eventually they even did one together, but before that happens, Miguel just laid it all out on the table. Dexter kept showing in small ways how adept he was at killing. He was a master at lockpicking, he always knew exactly what tools were needed, and he never left a trace. He was also good at knowing who to target and who to stay away from. All of this tells Miguel what he already knew, basically. Dexter was an experienced killer. He finally told Dexter to his face that he didn't think Freebo was his first, or Ethan was his second. He asked Dexter outright how many people he had killed. Even though Dexter didn't answer outright, he pretty much confirmed everything by letting Dexter know that he did have a very real darkness inside of him that the code helped him control. Dexter could play coy all he wanted, but Miguel knew the truth. He isn't really thought of as someone who suspected Dexter, but he was one of the first people to put it all together, and one of the few people who actually caught Dexter red-handed. Of course, he eventually got too big for his britches. He started acting outside of the code and targeting innocent people. Between that and knowing Dexter's secret, Dexter knew that Miguel was a loose cannon and needed to be stopped. He was strangled to death and left in the middle of a park to be found by police. Once again, suspecting Dexter ends in death. But it turns out that wouldn't be the case for everyone who caught on. After Miguel's death, his brother Ramon Prado became the next person who strongly suspected Dexter of being a killer. Ramon's suspicions were fueled by grief, anger, and a long-standing distrust of Dexter. Although he never uncovered the truth, Ramon came dangerously close to turning his suspicion into something deadly. From the very beginning, Ramon never liked Dexter or how close he was to Miguel. While Miguel formed a friendship with Dexter too quickly for Ramon's liking. And Miguel often defended Dexter while Ramon saw something unsettling about him the whole time. He viewed Dexter as an outsider who had inserted himself into Miguel's life too easily. That instinctive distrust created tension between the two men long before Miguel's death. When Miguel was ultimately found dead, Ramon's suspicions immediately focused on Dexter. Miguel's body had been discovered in a quiet neighborhood, and the circumstances surrounding the murder raised many questions. Ramon confronted Dexter directly at the scene where Miguel's body had been discovered. Overcome yet again with grief and rage, he accused Dexter of knowing more than he was saying. While Ramon did not have proof that Dexter killed Miguel, he believed Dexter had somehow played a role in what happened. Ramon's anger increased in the days that followed. At Miguel's funeral, Ramon's emotions boiled over. Despite the lack of evidence connecting Dexter to the murder, Ramon was so convinced that Dexter had somehow betrayed his brother that he kicked Dexter out of the funeral. To Ramon, Dexter had no right to mourn Miguel, and his presence felt like an insult to the Prado family. Still searching for answers, Ramon took matters into his own hand. He broke into Dexter's apartment and ransacked the place, hoping to find some kind of evidence that would confirm his suspicion. Ramon ripped through drawers, cabinets, and all of Dexter's personal belongings, convinced that he would uncover proof that Dexter was a dangerous creep. But despite tearing the apartment to shreds, he found nothing that could tie Dexter to Miguel's death. Ramon's obsession eventually spiraled out of control. He showed up drunk at Dexter and Rita's rehearsal dinner. Emboldened by alcohol and still blinded by grief, Ramon confronted Dexter in front of everyone, threatening him and even pulling a gun on him. That was a pretty dumb move because half of Dexter's invitees were cops. They quickly intervened and Ramon was arrested on the spot. Later, Dexter visited Ramon. During that conversation, Ramon revealed something that made the whole situation make a lot more sense. He let Dexter know that Miguel asked him to protect him from Dexter. According to Ramon, Miguel hired him as a kind of personal security against Dexter, though Miguel never fully explained why he felt threatened in the first place. To Ramon, that request was just another confirmation that Dexter was a dangerous presence in his brother's life. However, as the discussion continued, Dexter managed to shift Ramon's perspective. Dexter pointed out that Miguel had been hiding many secrets, that he was paranoid, and had manipulated many of the people around him on a regular basis. Not even his own wife knew what he had been up to in recent weeks. Finally, as Dexter mentioned to Ramon the story Miguel once told him about standing up to their abusive father to protect his brothers, in reality, it had been Ramon who had done that, not Miguel. The revelation made Ramon realize that Miguel had a history of reshaping the truth to suit his own image, no matter how delusional. Maybe his brother wasn't as put together as he liked to pretend. After their conversation, Ramon began to understand that Miguel was lying to so many people, including Dexter and probably him too. That helped Ramon accept that Miguel was a troubled soul, and he was able to let go of his obsession with taking Dexter down. In the end, Ramon survived because he made a choice that many others who suspected Dexter never did. Instead of continuing to chase the truth or seeking revenge, Ramon abandoned the vendetta entirely. And when he was released from jail, he chose to focus on his family and move forward with his life. That decision ultimately saved him from meeting the same fate as the other two Prado brothers and so many others who thought they could corner Dexter with little more than a hunch and a grudge. And Ramon wasn't the last person to make that crucial life-saving choice after suspecting Dexter. After Rita's death, Dexter must have been getting a little sloppy because he was seen in the middle of the act yet again. This time, it was a woman who caught Dexter red-handed, just like Miguel Prado did a few years earlier. Dexter was targeting a man named Boyd Fowler at the time after finding blood evidence proving that he was responsible for at least one murder. When Dexter got Fowler to the kill room he had set up inside the man's own house, he went through with the kill as planned, never realizing that he was being watched. As it turns out, Boyd was responsible for way more than one death. He was involved in the torture and murder of at least 12 women by the time Dexter found him, and he had a 13th victim, Lumen Pierce, locked away in his house. And she saw everything. Lumen was lucky to be alive. She had been abducted, raped, and tortured by Boyd and his friends, who were definitely planning on killing her and stuffing her body in a barrel when they were done with their sadistic fun. Even though she was a dangerous loose end, Dexter didn't want to kill her. She was an innocent, and one he had just saved at that. He didn't know how to make her understand, so he just took her to the site where the Barrel Girls gang dumped all of their other victims. He needed to make her understand that he saved her life so he could get rid of her, but make sure she wouldn't want to turn him in for what she saw. Lumen was traumatized, but she was no dummy. She started asking questions right away. She wanted to know why Dexter didn't take her to the hospital. She tried to say she didn't see anything, but Dexter knew that wasn't true. She informed Dexter that Boyd wasn't working alone when he attacked her, and she was determined to get revenge on everyone who was involved. Dexter tried to discourage her from that and send her back to her family, but she ignored all of his warnings and set off on her own to find her other rapists. It's when she fails spectacularly that it first becomes obvious that she is on to Dexter. Lumen tried to kill another member of the Barrel Girls gang, Dan the dentist, but she couldn't pull it off. She doesn't run for her life. She doesn't call the police and try to straighten everything out. What does she do? She calls Dexter. She must have already known on some level that Dexter was hiding something, and her suspicions of Dexter saved her ass that night. Dexter was able to come to her aid, take care of Dan for her, and make sure that neither of them were implicated in the crime. It was while he was doing all of that Lumen got even more reason to suspect him. He was incredibly fast-moving when he got on the scene. He knew exactly what he was doing and had every tool they would need to get away with the kill. He was able to come up with a plan on the spot and orchestrate every step perfectly. And he wasn't even slightly nervous even when they found out that the cops were on the way to investigate the gunshots. Dexter's confidence under that kind of pressure was a dead giveaway. He was no novice. He was a certified serial killer with tons of experience. And much like Miguel, she just called him out to his face. She told Dexter that she didn't believe that it was his first time, and later, as they were killing Cole Haram, another member of the gang, he told her she was right. Who knows if he would have ever been honest with her if she hadn't basically figured it out by herself. Dexter did care about Lumen, but it's not in his nature to just share his most damning secrets. Usually when people learn them, innocent people die. But again, Lumen was no dummy. So after she and Dexter tracked down and eliminated all of the members of the Barrel Girls gang, she chose to leave him and try to start a normal life. She could see that his darkness would never die, but hers started to fade the moment all of her attackers were dead. Dexter didn't want her to go, but he understood her decision. He let her walk right out of his life and took it as another sign that people like him could never find a lasting connection. Up to this point, no one who suspected Dexter had gotten away with their life, but Lumen managed to. Her brains kept her alive. Her instincts are what made her suspect Dexter in the first place, and they told her when to walk away too. No matter what happened, there is no way Dexter was going to pull the wool over her eyes, even though he never hurt her. Lumen knew from the moment she saw him how dangerous Dexter really was. Some people, however, took a little longer to figure him out. When Quinn was first transferred to Homicide, he saw Dexter the same way everyone else in the department did, an awkward lab geek with a knack for spot-on blood spatter analysis. He even referred to Dexter as a dweeb early on. But after Dexter saw Quinn steal some money from a crime scene, everything went south. Dexter didn't actually care about it at all, but Quinn wanted to get on his good side to make sure he didn't report him or anything. But Dexter curbed Quinn at every turn, and the more he gave Quinn the cold shoulder, the angrier Quinn got. He wanted leverage against Dexter in case he ever did decide to talk, and that's when he started looking into him. It started off pretty simply. Quinn started questioning where Dexter was always running off to. He accused him of chasing and cheating on Rita. But after Rita died, that's when Quinn started to become really suspicious of Dexter. Rita was killed by the Trinity killer, even though she didn't fit his pattern and he wasn't in the process of his kill cycles. Why would he have targeted Dexter's wife of all people? And then there was Dexter's behavior after he found Rita's body. The call he made to the emergency line was cold and clinical. It didn't sound like a distraught husband at all. And when police arrived on the scene, Dexter cryptically said that it was him. Quinn noticed that their next-door neighbor, Elliot, was more upset about Rita's murder than Dexter was. It all struck him as more than a little odd. Odd is what Quinn thought Dexter was before that moment. After it, he knew Dexter was hiding something dark, and he was going to find out what it was. When Quinn saw a certain set of police sketches from the Trinity investigation, he knew for a fact that he was on to something. As police hunted for Arthur Mitchell, they were looking for a man named Kyle Butler, who Arthur's family reported hanging around him the past few weeks. The police sketches looked exactly like Dexter, and Quinn seemed to be the only person who realized that. He tried to bring it to Lagerta, but she protected Dexter and told Quinn to drop it. He didn't listen. Quinn was so sure of his suspicions that he tracked down Trinity's son, Jonah, even as he and the rest of the family were being moved into witness protection just to ask him if he recognized Dexter from a picture. If Jonah had confirmed that he knew the man in the picture and called him Kyle Butler, Quinn would have had all of the evidence he needed to confirm everything he was thinking. But Jonah never got the chance to answer Quinn's question, and when word got back to LaGuerta that he was still looking into Dexter, he was put on paid administrative leave, but he still wasn't done. As his final act, Quinn hired disgraced ex-cop Stan Liddy to look into Dexter for him. Liddy was very good at it too. He found out that Dexter was housing Lumen, he orchestrated a fender bender to gather information on her, and even got pictures of Dexter and Lumen tossing garbage bags off the side of his boat at night. All of this looked worse and worse for Dexter. His wife dies, and a few months later, he has some random women staying in the same house, running around at night, dressed like criminals, dumping God knows what into the ocean. Even if Quinn hadn't been suspicious before, there couldn't have been a doubt in his mind after everything Liddy showed him. There's no doubt that if Liddy kept digging with Quinn's help, they would have exposed Dexter. But Quinn backed off because of his feelings for Deb, and he told Liddy to do the same. He may have been suspicious of Dexter, but if he was right about who he thought Dexter was, Quinn knew that exposing him wouldn't just be bad for with Deb, it would be bad for his chances of survival. When Liddy wound up dead in his own van without so much of a trace of evidence, Quinn realized how right he really was and how close he had been to dying himself. Letting it go was the best decision he ever made. But when Deb died in the series finale, Quinn watched Dexter murder her killer, Oliver Saxon, aka the brain surgeon, on camera. Dexter made it look like self-defense, but he killed Saxon with such precision and efficiency. He looked like a pro, but Quinn no longer cared to fight to expose Dexter, and he wanted Deb's killer gone just as much as Dexter did. He had a knowing look in his eye when he backed Dexter up, saying that the incident was a clear-cut case of self-defense. He knew what Dexter was, but he was prepared to take that secret to his grave. And that's why, just like Lumen, Quinn managed to stay alive despite seeing behind Dexter's mask. Of course, now that Batista is dead and Dexter has been confirmed as alive, Quinn may pop up in New York with renewed determination to expose Dexter and get justice for Angel. As Dexter tried to tell Batista, this can't possibly end well for Quinn. But we will just have to wait and see what Resurrection Season 2 really has in store for him. He made it out the first time he suspected Dexter. He may not be so lucky if he goes for round 2. Deb was one of the unlucky ones. She didn't want to suspect Dexter. In fact, she was basically trained not to. She spent her entire life overlooking his strange behavior, his emotionless responses, and mysterious disappearances. As far as she was concerned, Dexter was her brilliant, nerdy, protective brother, and she loved him. Not only did she fail to pick up on any of the signs that Dexter was hiding a dark secret, she fiercely defended him anytime anyone else started coming after him. When Doak said he was going to have Dexter investigated by Internal Affairs after the ice truck killer investigation, Deb went off on him on the spot in front of everyone, demanding he treat Dexter like a hero for saving her life. When Quinn called Dexter a dweeb, she threatened to kick his balls down his own throat, and when she found out that Quinn was looking into Dexter after Rita died, she was furious and broke up with him then and there. No matter what Dexter did or said, no matter how strangely or erratically he acted, Deb couldn't see anything but the same old brother she thought she always knew. But she couldn't deny what she saw with her own eyes, and at the end of Season 6, she saw Dexter murder Travis Marshall, the Doomsday Killer, right in front of her. She was in shock and almost called it into the homicide department, but Dexter talked her out of it, and before everything was said and done, she was helping him stage the crime scene to look like a suicide and burning down the church to erase any remaining full evidence. Just like with Miguel after Deb caught him, Dexter tried to convince her that it was all done in self-defense. He couldn't risk her figuring out that he was a serial killer, and after years of buying his bullshit, Deb fell for it. Initially. Slowly but surely, however, doubt started to creep in. Deb couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That is when her suspicions of Dexter really began. She thought back to what he told her at the church the night he killed Travis. When he was trying to get rid of her, he told Deb that he could clean up the mess on his own and that he knew what he was doing. She couldn't make heads or tails of what he meant by that, if it was his first time killing and it was done in the heat of the moment. She also didn't understand how he had all of the equipment he needed already on hand if he hadn't planned on killing Travis beforehand. And the roll of knives she saw at the scene looked suspicious too. She asked Dexter about all of that, and he just lied some more. He said he knew what he was doing because he's a forensic analyst, so he would know how to clean a crime scene. He had all of those supplies as part of his work kit, which he had with him to perform the final forensic sweep of the church like Deb asked him to. And the knives were Travis. He was going to use them to kill Dexter before he managed to turn the tables and take Travis out first. Even with all of his convenient explanation and smooth talking, Deb was still suspicious, especially because of one major detail. When Deb saw Travis up on the altar, he was wrapped in plastic in a very familiar way, but she couldn't remember where she'd seen it before. Then it hit her. That was the exact same way she was wrapped up after she was abducted by the ice truck killer. She already knew that Brian was Dexter's biological brother at that point, and he was a serial killer she had been too naive to see through. What if the same thing was happening with Dexter? After all, how would Dexter know to do that so perfectly if he had never killed anyone like that before? It didn't make any sense. And as much as Deb didn't want to suspect Dexter, she was a smart woman and a great detective. She couldn't ignore her gut about this. Eventually, Deb snapped. She got into Dexter's apartment and tore it apart, looking for anything that could help her make sense of everything she was thinking. And she found everything. The prosthetic arm from the ice truck killer investigation, Dexter's kill kit, his knives, the syringes filled with M99, and even his blood slides. She waited for Dexter to come home and asked him point blank if he was a serial killer, if he was the Bay Harbor butcher. Dexter knew he was caught. There was no point in lying to her anymore. He confirmed her suspicions and waited for the fallout. But Deb was much better off before she started to suspect Dexter. The truth of what he was pretty much destroyed her life. She was having trouble accepting what Dexter had done when she thought it was just Travis Marshall. But when she found out that he was the butcher, Deb almost brought him in herself. Her moral code was almost as strong as Dexter's killing code, but in the end, she couldn't turn on her brother. Instead, she went back to protecting him from anyone else who suspected him or got too close to the truth. She staged and hid evidence for him. She lied to Batista for him, and eventually she'd even kill someone. All of that just to keep Dexter from being exposed. Suspecting Dexter and actually learning his secret was the worst thing that ever happened to Deb. Before everything was said and done, she would collaborate with Dexter to take down the brain surgeon and end up brain dead in the hospital after the plan fell apart. Yet another innocent person dead just because she looked too closely into her suspicions of Dexter. But before Deb's life was snuffed out, there was Maria LaGuerta, the captain of the homicide department by that point. Besides Dokes, Maria may be the most commonly thought of character who was on to Dexter, but her suspicion wasn't based on Dexter's odd mannerism or some petty grudge. In fact, for years, LaGuerta really liked Dexter, and she never seemed to be bothered by his quirks, if she noticed them at all. And like Deb, she had spent a great deal of her own time and energy over the years to keep other people off Dexter's back. She took his side when he and Dokes were at each other's throats, and she protected him from Quinn's investigation after Rita was. For whatever reason, as good a detective as she was, Maria was never able to pick up on Dexter's darkness. But then again, he didn't give her much reason to. Dexter had been a valuable part of the Miami Metro Homicide Department since Maria joined the team, helping them solve murders that would have otherwise gone unsolved. But that all changed after Maria found a bloodslide at the crime scene of Travis Marshall's suicide. She never believed that Dokes was the Bay Harbor butcher. She knew him personally, and she couldn't accept the idea that he had been killing. Plus, she found evidence that Dokes couldn't be responsible for at least a handful of the deaths attributed to the butcher because he was on assignment with the military on the dates that the victims went missing, placing him in a completely different country. For other victims' disappearances, Dokes was with her on stakeouts that lasted for days, meaning he couldn't be responsible for those either. Since all of the victims were killed in the same way, and they were all clearly killed by the same person, if Dokes didn't do all of them, that meant he didn't do any of them. Maria knew in her heart that Dokes was innocent, but it didn't matter. She only let it go because the FBI officially closed the case after Dokes died. So when she saw that bloodslide, the known trophy of the butcher, Maria knew that her instincts back then were correct. See, but Dokes was innocent and the Bay Harbor butcher was still active. She didn't just assume that it was Dexter right away. She created a list of every Miami Metro employee who owned a boat and slowly worked away at the list until she had eliminated all but his name. And when she found out the cabin Dokes died in was being rented by a man named Santos Jimenez, one of the men responsible for the death of Dexter's mom, she saw a clear motive for Dexter to have killed him and framed Dokes for everything. But just like with Dokes, no one believed Maria when she tried to tell them Dexter was probably the butcher. She needed proof. She needed to catch him in the act. Maria was so sure that she was right about Dexter that she petitioned for the early release of a dangerous criminal just to lure Dexter. Hector Estrada was the man who orchestrated the murder of Dexter's mother. Once he was on the streets, Maria knew Dexter wouldn't be able to resist the urge to kill him. Her scheme almost worked, but Dexter caught on and got out of there before Maria could catch him. And even though her plan didn't quite work out as planned, Maria was still so confident in her suspicions about Dexter that she arrested and perp walked him through the station the very next morning. In perhaps one of the most memorable scenes in the series, LaGuerta proceeded to grill Dexter, trying to get him to confess to being the butcher in a very tense interrogation. Dexter wiggled his way out of it all and even managed to make it look like Maria was trying to frame him. She was starting to look unhinged, untrustworthy, and unfit to be the captain of homicide. After the whole Dexter interrogation fiasco, Maria was going to be investigated by internal affairs, but she wouldn't live long enough to see their findings. For her suspicion of Dexter, Maria would pay with her life. Dexter turned the tables and used her own plan against her. This time he used Estrada to lure out Maria, and when she arrived, he planned to kill her, finally putting her obsession with the Bay Harbor butcher to rest. But Deb intervened at the last minute, shooting LaGuerta to protect Dexter and proving once again that any suspicions someone may have about Dexter are best kept to themselves. Anything more is almost a guaranteed death sentence. As we know, after his sister's death, Dexter started a new life in Iron Lake, New York. He abandoned his son Harrison and faked his death, never looking back. But while he was living it up as Jim Lindsay in that small town, the son he abandoned a decade earlier was having a very hard time. After his foster mother, Hannah, died, Harrison lived on the streets and as a vagrant for a while before he decided to try and track down his dad. He hitchhiked all the way to Iron Lake and broke into Dexter's house looking for clues that he was in the right spot. It was tough to rebuild their relationship, mostly because Harrison was very angry at Dexter for leaving him behind, and Dexter was still hiding things from him, and Harrison could feel it. When they went to therapy, Harrison stopped Dexter from lying to the therapist about what happened to Rita, and later called Dexter out for not being honest with him, even after everything he'd been through. The more Dexter lied, the more suspicious Harrison became about him. Why was Dexter living under a false name across the country from where they used to live? Those are the actions of someone with something to hide. Harrison's concerns about his dad only grew after they were abducted and almost killed by Kurt Caldwell. And after that happened, Dexter decided to give Harrison a PG explanation of what he was. To explain Kurt's decision to target them, Dexter told Harrison the story of how he confronted Wiggles the Clown. Wiggles was a murderous pedophile who photographed his victims after killing them. Even though Dexter really wanted to be completely honest with Harrison, something inside of him wouldn't let him tell Harrison that he killed Wiggles. Instead, Dexter told Harrison that he just scared him to prevent him from hurting anyone else. Harrison didn't mention it at the moment, but he could tell Dexter was still holding something back. If he was still lying even after he admitted to drugging, kidnapping, threatening a pedophile, whatever he was still hiding had to be pretty dark. There really was only one logical conclusion. His father was a killer. That's why he faked his own death, that's why he adopted a fake identity, and that's why he actually went after Wiggles the Clown. Not to scare him, but to kill him. By the time Dexter and Harrison found Kurt's trophy room, the underground bunker where he was storing nearly 36 perfectly preserved corpses, Harrison knew the truth. In his mind, Wiggles and Kurt both deserved to die for what they had done. If Dexter was as disgusted by what they had done as he claimed, there was no way he wouldn't see it that way. So Harrison just said it flat out, "You killed Wiggles, didn't you?" And finally Dexter admitted it. For a brief moment, Harrison thought that Dexter was like Batman. He saw his vigilantism as a necessary evil that saved thousands of lives. He never thought his dad would hurt an innocent person, and in that way, Dexter still had Harrison fooled. But when he killed Sergeant Logan just to get out of jail, the illusion was completely shattered. Harrison was resourceful enough to track Dexter down, and he was smart enough to see past Dexter's lies and half-truths to figure out that he was a killer. But nothing could have prepared him for how he felt when his worst suspicions about Dexter turned out to be true. He was scared and disgusted by what Dexter was, a remorseless and selfish murderer who only cared about himself. He told Dexter to turn himself in for what he did to Logan, and when Dexter refused, Harrison shot him, aiming to kill. Dexter was left to bleed out in the snow, and Harrison fled Iron Lake more traumatized than he was when he arrived. But by some miracle, he was able to join the ranks of Lumen and Quinn as one of the few people who learned Dexter's secret and lived to see another birthday. Angela Bishop became one of the few people who successfully pieced together the truth about Dexter almost entirely on her own. Angela's path to Dexter's secret started when she began to follow a trail of small inconsistencies that slowly exposed Dexter's carefully constructed identity, and by the end of their story, she was completely certain that Dexter was a killer. Angela's suspicions began due to something deeply personal. While she was dating Dexter, or as she knew him, Jim Lindsay, she discovered that he had been hiding a major part of his life from her, an estranged son. When Harrison suddenly appeared in Iron Lake, Angela realized that Dexter had never mentioned having a child. The revelation made her question what else he might be hiding. For someone who had always seemed quiet but honest, that major deception planted the first seeds of doubt in her mind. Those doubts grew significantly when Angela attended a police conference in New York City and ran into Angel Batista from Miami Metro. During their conversation, Batista casually mentioned a man named Dexter Morgan, his former friend and colleague who had supposedly died years earlier. As Angela listened to him, she realized that the details Batista shared perfectly matched the man she knew as Jim Lindsay, specifically the part about him having a son named Harrison. The chance encounter made her realize that Dexter had been lying to her about his name and his past the entire time he lived in Iron Lake. From that moment forward, Angela began quietly investigating him, and her suspicions intensified further when her Sergeant Logan told her about an incident involving a local drug dealer. Miles O'Flynn had recently sold drugs to Harrison's friends, which Harrison nearly overdosed on. Logan let it slip to Angela that Dexter had violently attacked Miles in retaliation. Logan only saw him hitting Miles, but Dexter really went there prepared to kill the man before Logan intervened. The story struck Angela as extreme and out of character for Jim, and an outburst like that suggested that he might be capable of far more violence than he let on. Soon after Dexter's scuffle with Miles's, his supplier, Jasper Hodges, was found dead in his house. The death appeared to be the result of a ketamine overdose, but investigators could not find ketamine anywhere else in the house, only in Jasper's system. That strange detail stood out to Angela, especially after she learned that Dexter had recently obtained a large quantity of ketamine from the town veterinarian. The coincidence was impossible to ignore, and her suspicion deepened. The breakthrough came when Miles told Angela that Dexter had pricked him in the neck with something during the fight. When Angela examined Jasper's body more closely, she discovered a small wheel mark on his neck, too. That mark matched distinctive punctures found on victims of the infamous Bay Harbor butcher. Angel mentioned during his presentation at the conference that not everyone was sold on the idea that James Dokes was the butcher. Realizing that Dexter had once worked on those cases right alongside Angel when he lived back in Miami, Angela began to see a horrifyingly real possibility. Dexter might actually be the true Bay Harbor butcher. More evidence surfaced after Kurt Caldwell burned down Dexter's cabin. While examining the wreckage, Angela discovered a titanium screw from the hip surgery of Matt Caldwell, Kurt's missing son. That discovery strongly suggested that Dexter had killed Matt, whom Angela and the rest of the community had been looking for weeks by then. After finding that, Angela was convinced of suspicion. Matt wasn't missing, he was dead, and Dexter killed him. Between Dexter's false identity, his hidden son and murky past, the ketamine link, the injection marks, and Matt Caldwell's remains being found in his cabin, she believed she had finally uncovered the truth. Acting on that certainty, Angela followed in Maria's footsteps and became the second person to arrest Dexter for murder. She was determined to bring him to justice, but of course, that never happened. Dexter killed Logan and broke out of jail, but that escape didn't last long. Harrison shot and almost killed Dexter less than an hour after the botched jailbreak. Despite discovering the terrifying secret of who Dexter really was, Angela managed to survive. When the final confrontation ended with Dexter's apparent death, she took responsibility for the shooting and told Harrison to leave Iron Lake and never come back. Dexter managed to survive the gunshot wound, but by the time he came out of his coma, Angela was long gone. She saw what Dexter was capable of and chose to leave Iron Lake with her daughter Audrey. With that, she brought her long, complicated hunt for the truth about Dexter Morgan to a close without a conviction. This was a smart move on Angela's part, and it likely saved her and her daughter's lives. Kurt Caldwell gradually became convinced that Dexter Morgan was responsible for the disappearance of his son, Matt Caldwell. While the police investigation moved slowly and investigators struggled to find evidence, Kurt's suspicions of Dexter came through a mix of intuition, observation, and his own desperate need to understand what happened to Matt. Matt's disappearance was the event that set everything in motion. After a reckless hunting trip and a violent confrontation in the woods, Matt vanished without a trace, almost. The town of Iron Lake quickly became concerned and rallied together to find Matt, with Angela Bishop spearheading the investigation as a missing persons case at first. For most parents, that kind of attention from law enforcement would be welcome, but Kurt had a very different reaction. Beneath his friendly public persona, Kurt was secretly a serial killer himself. He had been abducting and murdering runaway women for years. The last thing he needed was a determined police chief digging deeper into his life. As Angela continued looking into Matt's disappearance, Kurt realized that her investigation would lead her to the caves in town, eventually exposing something more important to him than the truth about his son. Kurt hid the body of his first victim down there, and if Angela kept pushing, she would uncover the hidden pattern of missing women connected to him. That possibility terrified him. To protect himself, Kurt made a shocking decision. He lied to the cops. Kurt told Angela that Matt had contacted him and that his son was actually alive. According to Kurt, Matt had just decided to stay away in New York City for a while to avoid getting in trouble for shooting the protected white buck on Seneca Nation land. The lie was convincing enough to stall the investigation and push Angela to shift her focus elsewhere, at least for a bit. But it wasn't long before she realized that Kurt lied, though she couldn't imagine why. After lying to Angela about Matt, Kurt celebrated in a pretty strange and public way. Believing that the crisis had passed, he stepped outside and began dancing and singing in the snow. He treated the moment as if he had experienced a miracle, his son alive. Of course, Dexter knew that wasn't true, and he also couldn't understand why Kurt was lying. Thinking that he was too drunk to drive, Dexter offered Kurt a ride home, and that was when something strange caught Kurt's attention. The flakes falling from the sky were not snow at all. They were ash. That realization triggered a new line of thinking. Kurt noticed that both his jacket and Dexter's truck had been covered in the same ash-like residue. Slowly, the pieces began to connect in his mind. If ash had been falling through the air, it must have come from a nearby fire. That thought led Kurt to inspect a furnace connected to the incineration site. When got there, he discovered something chilling inside the furnace: metal screws. Those screws were distinctive orthopedic screws from a hip surgery Matt got years earlier after the deadly boat crash he caused. The moment Kurt saw them, he understood exactly what had happened. Someone had liked Matt, burned his body, and the only part that survived the flames were the surgical screws. In Kurt's mind, the evidence pointed straight to Dexter. The ash, the timing, and the proximity to Dexter's activities convinced him that the quiet, unassuming newcomer to Iron Lake had murdered his son. Once Kurt accepted that reality, his behavior changed dramatically. He became obsessed with revenge. Instead of quietly reporting his suspicions to the police, Kurt decided to strike back in a personal way. An eye for an eye. Believing that hurting Dexter's son would cause the greatest pain possible, Kurt targeted Harrison. He manipulated Harrison and ultimately tried to kill him to avenge Matt. But Kurt underestimated the man he was dealing with. Every attempt he made to kill Dexter failed. His schemes unraveled one by one, and his secret life as a murderer was eventually exposed. In the end, Kurt found himself captured and strapped to Dexter's kill table. Dexter didn't just execute him because he fit the code, but also for meddling in his life and threatening his son. Of course, like so many of the other people who tried to go up against Dexter, Kurt's downfall may have been avoidable. Whatever suspicions he had about Dexter might have been better left unsaid. By chasing revenge and inserting himself into Dexter's life, Kurt all but guaranteed his own fate. If he had kept his little theories to himself and focused on his own life, Dexter might never have turned his attention toward Kurt at all. Angel Batista became the most recent person to seriously pursue the truth about Dexter. For years, Batista had trusted Dexter as a friend and co-worker at Miami Metro, but he got some shocking information that made every unresolved question from the past suddenly come rushing back to him. What began as disbelief quickly morphed into an obsessive need to understand what had really happened. The turning point came when Angela Bishop revealed to Batista that his old buddy Dexter was alive. She exposed everything and told Batista that the man living in Iron Lake under the name Jim Lindsay was actually Dexter Morgan. For Batista, the news was almost unbelievable. As far as he knew, Dexter had supposedly died years earlier during a devastating hurricane that hit Miami following Deb's death. Learning that Dexter had actually been alive the whole time immediately made the many doubts Batista had buried over the years resurface. Instead of ignoring the revelation, Batista acted on it. He gathered every file he had related to the investigation into the Bay Harbor butcher, as well as the files and records connected to the deaths of James Dokes and Maria Laguerta, both of whom strongly suspected Dexter right before they died in very unusual ways. With all of the evidence he needed gathered and ready to go, Batista traveled from Miami to Iron Lake, determined to confront the man he had once called his hermano. Unlike Angela, who was smart enough to drop everything and leave town while Dexter was still in a coma, Batista didn't give up. He refused to let Dexter escape again without answering the questions that had haunted him for years. When Dexter finally regained consciousness, Batista confronted him directly. The conversation was tense, and Dexter knew he was being informally interrogated. Batista laid out everything that had bothered him since Dexter disappeared from Miami: the suspicious deaths, the weird coincidences, and the way every major tragedy that struck the Miami Metro team seemed to revolve around Dexter's life. There's no doubt that a lot less people on the team had been dying since Dexter died. As Batista examined the past, but everything started falling into place. The official story that James Dokes had been the Bay Harbor butcher suddenly looked less convincing than ever. Dokes had insisted until the very end that Dexter was hiding something. Then there was his ex-wife, Maria Laguerta, who had reopened the butcher investigation only to be found dead in a shipping container within a couple of weeks of doing so. And Deb's death came in the middle of the same chaos. When Batista stepped back and looked at the full picture, he realized that Dexter had been present at the center of every major turning point. Batista became determined to prove that his suspicions were true. Dexter Morgan had been the real Bay Harbor butcher all along. His suspicions ran even deeper when he followed Dexter and his son to New York City. After learning the details of Ryan Foster's murder, Batista noticed something unsettling. The method used in the killing and body disposal echoed the ritualistic pattern once associated with the butcher. Dexter managed to frame Lady Vengeance for the crime, but Batista didn't buy it. Instead, all of his instincts led him to suspect that Harrison Morgan was the one who carried out that murder after being trained by Dexter himself. Following that instinct, Batista pursued another lead, this time involving a now imprisoned Mia LaPierre. While investigating Dexter and the death of Ryan, Angel thought to present Mia with a picture of Dexter and ask her if she recognized his face. This was the same tactic Quinn thought to use when he was investigating Dexter all those years ago, showing a photo of Dexter to Jonah Mitchell to see if he knew him as Kyle Butler. This only showed just how much Batista had begun thinking like the investigators who had suspected Dexter before him. Unfortunately, just like Quinn, Angel never got an answer. Mia was found dead in her cell right before he could question her. Even though Dexter wasn't responsible for that, Angel found it a little too convenient and figured Dexter was in on Mia's death too. Another discovery strengthened his theory. Batista noticed that a serial killer in New York known as the Dark Passenger had mysteriously stopped operating at the exact same time Dexter moved to the city. Taking out a killer was the exact MO of the Bay Harbor Butcher. To Batista, the timing felt far too perfect to be coincidence. As he continued digging, Batista eventually tracked Dexter using his AirPods. The lead brought him dangerously close to catching Dexter in the act. At one point, he nearly walked in on Dexter with a victim wrapped in the unmistakable style of the Bay Harbor Butcher. But by the time he got to the kill room, Dexter was gone, and the would-be victim was long gone, running for his life. Batista kept pushing forward, tailing Dexter's every move, and eventually he caught pictures linking Dexter to Leon Prater in New York. He didn't know who Prater was at the time, but believing he might be in danger, Batista went to his compound and tried to warn him. Unfortunately, that decision only pulled Batista directly into the line of fire. Instead of protecting Prater, Batista ended up becoming another pawn in his deadly game. Prater abducted Angel and presented him to Dexter on a silver platter, so expecting him to kill his old friend to save his own skin and get back in Prater's good graces. But when Dexter refused to kill Angel, Leon took care of it for him, shooting Batista in the back several times and leaving him to bleed out in his serial killer trophy vault. It was a devastating end for such a beloved legacy character, but Angel basically dug his own grave. Throughout the investigation, multiple people warned him to walk away. Quinn urged him to come back to Miami. He didn't know why he even left for New York in the first place. Detective Claudette Wallace and her partner, Detective Oliva, also advised Angel to go home and stop impersonating a police officer in New York. Even Dexter himself suggested not so subtly that Batista give up and go home before things got ugly. But Batista could not let it go. Like Dokes and LaGuerta before him, Batista refused to ignore the truth once he believed he had seen it. The more evidence he uncovered, the stronger his suspicions became, the more determined he became to bring Dexter to justice and for all. Tragically, that determination led him right into deadly territory. In the end, Batista died a horrible, undeserved death, all because of where his suspicions about Dexter led him. His fate echoed those of his friends and colleagues who suspected Dexter before him. Just like Dokes and LaGuerta, Batista paid the ultimate price for getting too close to Dexter's secret. But Angel's instincts were dead on, and his suspicions were more valid than most of the people left to mourn him would ever know. Did we miss anyone? Whose instincts about Dexter impressed you the most? Drop a comment letting us know who you felt sorriest for. And if you like this video, check out our video breaking down the darkest theories in the Dexter universe. I suspect you should slash that subscribe button before you go. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.